I've been framed for murder, and the cops are in on it.
Open up, please.
I'll be right out.
Welcome to Sin City. It was 2005 when I saw this wild, raunchy action movie, but the movie was released at the same time that a lot of other comic book films were coming out. What distinguishes Sin City is that we're looking at a film that knows we've seen other films before. The more movies you've seen, the more you'll enjoy it. In fact, Sin City is a deliberately superficial movie. The filmmakers have created entertainment about the surface pleasures of movie watching. We have sex, violence, fast cars, big guns, naked body, and an amplification of all things visual. So give me just a few minutes of your time and let's go back and have a look at Sin City. Sin City is based on the graphic comics of Frank Miller. These comics are known for their uses of shadows, color, and their expressionistic drawing style. But more importantly, the graphic novels were inspired by old Hollywood movies, specifically film noir. Now, film noir movies were usually crime stories or detective stories that were characterized by their dark lighting and morally ambiguous characters like femme fatales, and their reliance on voiceover narration. In adapting Frank Miller's style, Sin City has exaggerated the visual elements of film noir, while maintaining the comic book's episodic structure. So the result is a movie based on a comic book, which is based on a movie. The look of Sin City is deliberately excessive. For example, we don't just see shadows cast on the wall, we see gigantic shadows that have a life of their own almost. The characters don't just have bodies, they have these super bodies or these hyper-sexualized bodies or hyper-masculine bodies that are covered with various scars and wounds. There's also a very deliberate use of color in this film, particularly black and white. The film actually has many scenes that are partially colored. This will be when the entire sequence is black and white, but there'll be one object in the sequence that is colored. This partial use of color is designed to draw attention to certain characters in the story. For example, the color red will be used to emphasize the wounds of a male character. However, with women, the color red will be used to emphasize her sexuality. The result is a very reflexive film that is constantly referencing its own artificiality. Or in other words, Sin City is a movie that is constantly highlighting its own moviness. American cinema seems to be obsessed with two things: sex and death. It's remarkable how often movies mix the two, and Sin City is no exception. Sex is one of the many sins in Sin City. The film is filled with various perversions. We see pedophilia, prostitution, rape, sex trafficking. But what's interesting here is the role that sex plays in many of the various crimes in the city. Sex seems to motivate both the crimes and their resolutions. Let's think about this now. After having sex with Marv, the woman Goldie turns up dead. In fact, the motivation behind Marv's vengeance for Goldie is because the sex between them was so good. The character of Jackie Boy's desire for sex with a prostitute is what leads to his death and the subsequent big fat kill. Bruce Willis's character of Hartigan seeks to rescue the victim of a sex crime, even as he desires the girl for himself. So Sin City is one in a long line of American films that equate sex with danger and violence. I should point out here that Sin City is a movie filled with attacks on the male genitalia. I counted at least 6 moments in the film where someone gets their balls stabbed, chopped off, or ripped off. Since the film is filled with so much sexualized violence, we should consider how women are depicted in Sin City. It goes without saying that Sin City is a big budget exploitation film, and like most exploitation films, the women's bodies are objectified. Most of the female characters in Sin City are either prostitutes or strippers, or just damsels in distress. But what's strange is how all the male heroes in this film have complete and total respect for women. The characters of Marv, Hartigan, and Dwight all come to the rescue of the film's female characters. So in Sin City you have a strange sexual politics, one in which the women are strong, but still have to be the sex objects of men. We've talked about the sex, now let's talk about the death. Action movies are filled with undead heroes, men who never die. One of the many hallmarks of action films is that the hero has some kind of indestructible body. He may be shot, stabbed, electrocuted, pulverized, but the bodies of these action movie stars were indestructible. Sin City takes this idea to the extreme and gives us scenes in which death does not hold their characters back. The character of Marv is shot hundreds of times, beaten, stabbed, and still doesn't die. Even when Marv is sent to the electric chair, it takes 2 jolts just to kill him, because one electrocution isn't good enough. Bruce Willis's character of Hartigan almost seems to be a satire of his status as an action movie icon. His body faces an onslaught of various wounds throughout the film, until he finally takes his own life. So in Sin City, death doesn't seem to mean anything. Every story is filled with people who we thought were dead actually reappearing, or in some cases coming back to life. In a morbid scene directed by Quentin Tarantino, a nearly decapitated Benicio del Toro momentarily returns from the dead in order to taunt Dwight. So Sin City at times does turn into a kind of urban zombie movie, one that uses this hyper-death imagery to parody the excesses of action movies.